was a horror weekend on the soft tissue front, especially when it comes to hamstring injuries.
Hamstring injuries have ravaged the AFL.
Big round for hammy awareness, so everyone's doing hammy. Crazy.
So in the AFL, there's been an absolute explosion of hamstring injuries over recent years, and they're especially occurring during the beginning of the season. In fact, just this year in round 2, we've seen 8 hamstring injuries. Why is this the case? Well, here is a few potential reasons. Firstly, the demands of the sport are simply just becoming tougher and tougher, and with those tougher demands calls for an increase in players' abilities, and that means players need to firstly run more than ever, secondly run faster and higher speeds than ever, they need to achieve crazier joint angles than ever, and much, much more. To not only win, but just to even compete in modern day football, especially at the highest level, players need to adapt to the rising demands of the game that I just mentioned. But obviously this comes at a cost, when we're talking broadly about injuries in general, or specifically about hamstrings in particular. The problem with hamstrings is they play such a vital and pivotal role in performing on the field when we're talking about AFL. They play a crucial role in sprinting, hinging patterns such as bending over to pick up the ball. They play a role in kicking the footy as well. And so you see obviously a lot of these actions repeated at a super high level in games. As they are a prime and main contributor to these types of movement patterns, obviously the rise of intensity in the game is also going to place huger and more intense demands on the hamstrings. Second is changes in training philosophy around the league. From what I've seen this year and the last couple recent years, is that clubs and high performance sectors of clubs are placing a massive emphasis on higher speed running efforts. And there's nothing wrong with this. This is just the natural progression of training for AFL clubs. Obviously, you can see with what I just mentioned before, the rise in intensity of the game in general and the demands being placed on the body. But alongside that, with the changes of rules, for example, we've got like a much faster, much more free-flowing game, which means naturally there's going to be way more higher speed efforts. And so just the natural progression of training is implementing more high speed efforts, and that's simply just to kind of build that capacity and durability of the hamstrings, just so that they're simply more equipped to tolerate the demands that will be placed on them that I just mentioned. So if players can tolerate more volume of these higher speed demands in their off season, it would be safe to assume that when the real season comes around, the hamstring complex will be in a much better position to tolerate these higher speed efforts in games that can't really be replicated in training, or at least to the same intensity. However, you can train it to the best of your abilities during training and off season. Third reason is players' rights and changes to time away from the game. So the AFLPA, the AFL Players Association, has fought really hard to get more rights for the players, and one of the rights is just an extended period of time off during the off season. So currently players get at least 8 weeks off post-season before they come back to the club, and then they'll get also another 3 weeks off during that Christmas period as kind of a Christmas break. Now, from a surface level, this sounds like a really good idea. From an ethical standpoint, it's really good. Long seasons really push these guys to the limits, and they probably really do need a bit more of a break just for a bit of a freshen up psychologically for the mind and also physically for the body. However, this 8 week and 3 week off period ultimately leads to having 11 weeks off of training, where although the players would be assigned conditioning work from the club, basically it's up to the players to kind of continue training properly, and it's up to them whether they do less training or they try to push the limits a little bit more than recommended. Essentially, they're just responsible for their own training during that period, irregardless of if they're assigned training or not. It's still up to them kind of what they complete. From this, you're going to get 2 potential outcomes. The first one is the potential of overtraining, which is unrealistic, but it's still a possibility. And the second outcome, which is much more of a possibility, is undertraining and basically coming back to training or pre-season or the season deconditioned. So you hear a lot of the high performance coaches say that they want players back in relatively good condition to then start to basically have the platform to implement tougher training sessions and tougher physical demands on the body.
We had an extended off-season period where the boys worked really hard and came back in exceptional shape, came back really ready to go. Really the expectation is these days that when you come back on day one of pre-season that you're ready to go for pretty high intensity football-based training. But our group came back in exceptional general fitness state, aerobic-based really good, general strength levels really good. So that allows us a platform there for us to get into higher intensity football drills pretty early on.
Usually the coaches aren't asking for the players to come back in tip-top condition, although they'd probably prefer that. What they're really asking for the players is just to make sure that they have like a good foundation of fitness, and also they maintain majority of their qualities during the off season. So I'm sure like a lot of players would come back just fit. Maybe they haven't been working on specifics like sprinting or jumping as much. However, they'll probably come back pretty fit, and I feel like coaches would be happy with that because they're coming back with some sort of level of fitness and, you know, performance in comparison to nothing at all. And this 11 weeks off leaves a lot of room for undertraining and essentially deconditioning of the body. And although 11 weeks doesn't sound like a long time, when you compare it to other professional sporting leagues in the world, it actually is quite a big chunk of time. Let's take the NBA, for example. They get about 3 to 5 weeks off a year. And when you look at footballers like in the English Premier League, for example, they actually only get sometimes 3 weeks off a year, which is absolutely nothing. However, that leaves almost no room for deconditioning. And although they might get a little bit more time off just from their club, they still do extra football, like they'll go on international duties, for example. So AFL players basically get 2 times more time off over their off-season break than any other professional sporting competition in the world, excluding, say, the NRL. In saying that, I don't think these upper echelon professional sporting franchises and competitions have it right either. There's a really important balancing act between making sure the athlete is benefited psychologically but also physically by their time off, and making sure they're super refreshed in both those areas. It's got to be something between the AFL and then it's got to be something between, like, say, the NBA or the English Premier League. But at the same time, you really need to make sure that you avoid deconditioning. But in summary, basically these hamstring issues are always going to be hanging around and lingering around in the AFL. And the main reason is simply just because the athletes are getting bigger, faster, stronger, demanding way more of their bodies to kind of adapt to the current game style and compete, and therefore you're going to get a lot of casualties along the way. Although there is a huge increase in hamstring issues, I mean there was 8 in round 2, which is crazy. I don't think that's going to change the philosophy behind these high performance teams placing a heavy emphasis on more higher speed efforts. I think if anything it's going to kind of almost convince them that they need to do it more, because obviously how demanding the game is right now, these hamstrings really need to have super good capacity and they need to be super strong and durable. So I think, yeah, these coaches are probably going to lean more in towards this current age, high speed philosophy / approach. Like, obviously this is the best way to combat these hamstring issues, is really emphasizing this high speed running effort. And so, yeah, I think they're just going to continue that and basically just hope for the best and hope that it does the job. Maybe it's the time off that's the biggest variable that needs to be considered. I know from an ethics standpoint that players need to have enough time off. They need to go, they're humans, they need to go on holidays, they need to take time off, enjoy themselves. But at the same time, it might not necessarily be taking some of that time off away from them. It might just be, you know, giving them time off, but having stricter training during that time off that they must kind of perform on their own merit. Because obviously players do really need break. You just can't perform the entire year. Like, an example off the top of my head is Jason Tatum, who played some of the best basketball of his life, won his first NBA chip, and then went on to playing Olympics for America, so went on international duties, basically played a year and a half of basketball, 2 years of basketball straight without a break, and then ruptures his Achilles, which isn't why he ruptured his Achilles. But however, it is a big variable in potentially why he did rupture his Achilles, is just not having enough time off. But at the end of the day, although it sucks, the demands of the sport are just getting crazier and crazier. The hamstring complex is one of the most pivotal complexes in the body for performing the sport and executing the sport at a professional level. I think we're just going to see more casualties along the way. Hopefully they figure out a way to mitigate the risk. However, like I mentioned before, it's just going to be something that's always going to be hanging around, which is these hamstring issues, especially early on in the season, because you can't necessarily replicate the performance you'll see in games. And on top of that, the kind of fatigue that will be set on the body during these early games of the season, where you do have to also perform at the same intensity, because performing at a high intensity while being super fatigued does really matter. But there's my 3 reasons as to why I think hamstring injuries and issues are at an all-time high. If you think of many other reasons or any other different reasons, feel free to comment and let me know, and we can have a discussion about it here. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you like it, give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you want to see more stuff like this. Thanks.